Welcome back to the Story Podcast. We are knee deep in the Old Testament and heading for home. Hey, welcome back. We are talking about what does a frat boy, capital punishment, genocide, and a beauty pageant have in common?
And dice.
It's
a Bible story.
Dice. It is a Bible story.
Yeah.
One of the interesting things about the story of Esther, which if you were watching on Sunday, you got to see Glen do the dice, the roll of the dice for the cream pie. However, did not follow through in the service that I saw of pie facing somebody.
I didn't follow through in any of it. I told you ahead of time I'm going to roll the dice, and I don't have it in me to throw a pie in someone's face.
You said it in the service. It's true. It doesn't compute to me. If you don't roll the dice right, you get the pie in the face.
You get the pie, yeah. All of the guys were like, well, I thought I just deserved the pie in the face.
The poor wife, she was so sweet.
Yeah. Although some of the wives said, could I do it?
Yeah, right. People coming up afterwards, huh?
Yeah.
Esther is one of those stories, though, and you framed it at the very beginning with something interesting, which is this idea that it doesn't mention God's name.
Right.
And it doesn't appear even in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which was something that I didn't know that part of it.
Yeah.
So how do people make sense of that piece of it, especially with the canon of Scripture that we talk about, the books that get included versus don't get included? Esther it's not like it's on the bubble. It's widely included.
It's widely included in the canon. I have to admit, I confess I probably shouldn't just say this on the internet. I don't know exactly what the reasoning is on the Dead Sea Scrolls. I know that it was not a part of it.
Yeah.
It's one of the...
They lost that jar or something.
I don't know. I'm just guessing part of it too. It was written, later. It's one of the last books that could be possibly it. And it's different. It's.
Yeah.
So
it's a wild story. First of all, it's a story almost like it's almost too good to be true. Like it's a Hollywood type story where all of the pieces come together at the end in such a way that you're like, wow.
Yeah.
And so the underlying premise is,
which is very sophisticated for a story written in the 5th century BC. It's like got a modern thing. Which to me is always one of the apologetics of this happened.
Yeah.
Because otherwise they just weren't making up stories like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really shows that God writes those stories. He continues to write these intricate stories that when we look back on our lives, we go, how in the world did that all line up? God's in the business of writing those stories. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah.
Yeah. So as we jump into it, I don't know how much we want to recap the story. Maybe we'll do the Reader's Digest version, right? The frat boy King Xerxes, right? Basically, he calls. He has a party, calls the Queen Vashti to. And you said something which I'd never heard anybody else say too. This idea that she was supposed to appear in the crown and maybe nothing else.
Nobody knows, but it's like she's supposed to appear wearing her crown.
Yeah. Absolutely. But there's this pervasive theme, especially at the beginning of it, of physical beauty. And how do we make sense of that physical beauty in a place where we hear so often God cares more about character than really anything else? Esther's character is what's going to come to play later on. But how do we make sense of the things that God has given us, whether they're attractiveness or talents or skills or gifts or resources that he calls us to use? How do we make sense of that?
For me, kind of a long answer, and you're a dad of daughters, now adult daughters. Both Vashti and Esther have something in common, which is kind of surprising in the story, in that they are beautiful, but their value is not rooted in their beauty.
Right.
Their value is, as you just said, in their character, and you see it in both of them, and it's a parallel. And I just think that is something that we're supposed to be teaching, especially our daughters.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially the young women of this church. I think of especially Vashti to face that pressure to perform physically. Here she is, outwardly beautiful, to display that, to lean on that, to make that her identity, and yet she resists that. So, which is interesting in the ancient literature.
Resist.
Yes.
I mean, don't say no to the king.
Yeah. In the ancient literature, Vashti's kind of seen almost as not really heroic, but in more recent times, and I'm saying talking in the last 1500 years, Vashti is kind of surfaced as like a heroic character, which is really cool to me.
Yeah, absolutely. She stands up to this king, and for those who have read the entirety of not only the chapter in the story, but even the book itself, we see these beauty treatments are like a big
Right.
theme. It's like
Right.
beauty treatment upon beauty treatment,
Right.
and she goes to away to beauty camp almost,
Uh-huh.
and so we see this like very intense treatment system
Right.
before she gets a chance to have an audience with the king again.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
And it's meant, I mean, it's specifically mentioned, Vashti is lovely to look at, I
Yeah.
think is what the NIV says.
Yeah.
And the way I always learned it about Esther, remember, I forget what version it is, but it says she's lovely in form and feature.
yes, right.
You know?
Yeah.
So, I mean, it makes a point of calling out their physical beauty.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we end up with, obviously, the king goes off, he lets her live, but that's it. No more Vashti for you, he moves on to this beauty contest, really more than anything else, where he's looking for a new bride, which I guess the king gets to do that.
Yeah.
But he comes across this, this orphan Jewish girl, Hadassah, right? Raised by Mordecai. We don't know her backstory.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a part of me that, as I think about this, for anybody who's got like a crazy backstory,
Yeah.
like God does crazy things with people with
Right.
weird backstory.
Yeah. The surprising person.
Yeah, absolutely. Whether it's orphaned or just all kinds of painful stories that are in our backstory,
Yeah.
that God can, use those.
Yeah, she certainly had gone through some trauma in her life to lose both of her parents, I assume, at the same time. I don't know.
Right.
But yeah.
Right. And then we get to, basically the roll of the dice, which is such an interesting thing. I think we think so much of our life is based on chance.
Right.
And the question is how do we look at those situations that seem like they are very chance oriented in our world and begin to see God's hand in them? And maybe we don't until hindsight. How do you make sense of that?
Well, here's what I would say is, even as I was talking about, God controls the roll of the dice, what we want that to mean is everything works out for the good. And, you get a story like Esther where you do kind of see that, but that's not what the promise is.
No.
The promise is God is in control, works all things for the good of those who love him, but good people still get cancer.
Absolutely.
And, sometimes it ends in death and sometimes it is suffering. But I think what we can see is that God is in it all. Whether he's the fourth man in the fire with Shadrach and Meshach and Abednego, or, he just in that promise that, when you walk through the floods, you will not be overwhelmed. That doesn't mean you don't go through the floods. So it's kind of interesting that the roll of the dice, there's that proverb that we looked at, that says, God controls the direction of our life. We think it's us.
Yeah.
So
yeah, it's I mean, there's even that moment where Mordecai is encouraging Esther, it's your time.
Yeah.
It's go time for you.
Right.
But he says help will arise for the Jews from someone else.
Right.
If you don't do this. But perhaps you're in this position for such a time as this.
Yeah.
And I guess that is sort of the root question, I think, for anybody that's actually reading this story, is what circumstances or situations that maybe seem, random to us, does God have me here in this moment for this time to do this thing or to say even this thing? How do you lean into that? I don't know. Have you had to do that in your life where there's moments where you're like, what am I doing here? But this is the time.
Yeah.
What would be
I want to live all my life with that sort of attitude that it's not a mistake that I am
that I'm here?
where I am. And you read that in the New Testament, Paul into the church in Athens or the people in Athens, he talks about that, God directs the times and the places that we live and it's no accident there. So I think, on the big picture, it's like, there's some big things, but sometimes it's moment by moment. This is the person that you're sitting next to on an airplane. This is the person that you work with. This is the person that, is waiting your table today.
Yeah.
So to view all of those things, that my life is not by chance or by accident.
Right.
And I want to be a blessing there.
Yeah, it feels like we've had this run of stories where, it's big picture people who are just at the right place at the right time.
Right.
Daniel, Esther, obviously, and
Ezra and Nehemiah.
Ezra and Nehemiah is coming up too, and so we think about these circumstances that are well publicized stories of this is where God is going to use this person who, at the time, was a Jewish orphan. Nothing special about Hadassah.
Yeah.
Right. We don't even remember my name.
Right.
Hadassah, right. And so there's this layer of God using people where they are and frankly, the evil of like genocide.
Yeah.
I mean, this is
Yeah. We're going to destroy all the Jews. We're going to kill,
yeah,
destroy, and
and it's not like that's foreign to us. We see these stories throughout. I mean, Rwanda. I mean, even Nazi Germany. You know, we think about genocide,
Yeah.
but it's crazy for me to think God's people are in the crosshairs of this
Yeah.
genocide
Yeah.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you
Well,
make?
Jews have had that, throughout
Oh yeah,
history. That's one of the things.
absolutely. Yeah. And I guess there comes this moment where you think, when I'm being oppressed, when my
Uh-huh.
people or my family or my
Mhm.
whatever it is are being oppressed, how do we react in those moments? How do you tell people to react when they're being oppressed or they're feeling like they're in the crosshairs?
Yeah. Well, I think we've got some great examples from even the stories that you listed, Daniel and Mordecai, and we'll see in Nehemiah especially, in that you were talking about that you got to be prepared for the big things, those big moments. But one of the things you see is that Daniel rises to power not because of the big things, but just because he's faithful.
It's,
And when time hits, it says he goes out of his way to pray like he always does. And Mordecai is like, no, I'm just not going to bow down. And it's not like it's had this big moment. You get this idea that that's what he was always doing. And when he had a chance to save the king, he did that. So it's faithful in those small moments, prepares us for those big moments. And then when you hit those challenging times, hopefully our foundation is there that you can eventually get to a place where Esther says, hey, if I perish, I perish.
yeah.
I'm going to do this. I'm going to take a risk. If I perish, I perish.
Yeah. The I'm not going to bow down is a recurring theme.
Yeah.
Daniel refuses to bow down. Shadrach,
Mhm.
Meshach, and Abednego refuse to bow down.
Right.
Mordecai refuses to bow down. And as a result, they end up in trouble.
Right.
All
Right.
of them.
Right.
Right.
But
Lions den.
but
furnace.
clearly God with them.
Yeah, but clearly God with them. And so there comes this moment where it's like, what does it look like for us not to bow down? Whether it's to
Mm,
the idols in our own lives, or the culture that's sort of commanding us to bow down in certain things. What does it look like to stand firm in those moments, regardless of what it's going to cost us?
mhm. I guess I would answer that maybe just by trying to encourage you if you're in the middle of that situation, which is sometimes we've got to just not do the popular thing. Honestly, when we follow Christ, we're often going to be out of step with the culture. Now, it doesn't mean you're a jerk. It doesn't mean you set yourself up as, some martyr. But what it does mean is where we get our affirmation, where we get our security, where we get our, just doesn't come from those normal things. And sometimes you got to do the unpopular thing. And that's not easy for a guy like me who wants people's approval, and I assume God wired that in me. But sometimes you have to do the hard thing. And you see that in these characters. And I mentioned it. I don't know if I did in all of the services on Sunday, but this book, this group of books given to us that describe the exile. It's primarily we're looking at Daniel, some of the prophets, but Daniel, Esther, Ezra, and Nehemiah
Right.
really are like a playbook for the world that we're living in,
Right.
because they're living as strangers and aliens in this world, and they get their worldview, they get their identity, they get their value, not from the system around them, but from following after God. Now God grants favor, and they all get elevated to these positions. But these books of exile really are I think some of the most valuable parts of the Old Testament for us. It's what a gift God gave us, these
Yeah.
4 stories.
Yeah. Because it
exile.
relates so clearly to our lives, and specifically in various circumstances of our lives. It's funny. One of the so whats that you asked, by the time you get to the end, obviously we watch this resolution of the story, right? Mordecai and Esther boldly goes before the king.
Yeah.
King says you can have half them. She says no to half the
I
kingdom.
know.
No, let me cook you dinner again.
Yeah.
And so she cooks dinner again, and then as a result kind of unfolds this plan. And I love even the way you weaved in this idea of like the roll of the dice again. He can't sleep.
Yeah.
Read me the history books. And
Right.
and at the end it's like, wait a second, this Mordecai guy, I forgot all about Mordecai. Did we do anything for Mordecai?
Yeah.
And as a result, the Haman story, and it all twists into that moment for such a moment as this, right?
Yeah.
Where it all comes together.
Right.
But there is that moment where, and you alluded to it, Esther has been challenged by Mordecai to go in front of the king to plead the case of her people, the Jews, who are supposed to be slaughtered on the 13th of Adar.
Right.
Right. And so I can't imagine the terror
Yeah.
of walking into that moment, knowing that she hasn't been called
Hmm.
for in 30 days or whatever it
Right.
is, and she, we know the penalty if he doesn't extend the
The scepter,
scepter,
right?
right? That's it. You're toast.
Mhm.
Um, what does it mean to stand up in those moments, in those hardest of moments, for what is right, even if it could cost you everything?
Yeah.
How do we approach that as people that are terrified in that moment? How do we
Yeah.
deal with our
Yeah.
fear?
Yeah. I guess that's the courage that has as its foundation God's sovereignty.
Yeah.
Because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego say the same thing. They're like, if
If
you know,
we, yeah,
if we die, we die,
yeah,
but we're not going to bow down. And if we get thrown in the furnace, then God controls that.
okay.
If I perish, I perish. So there's this understanding, not that God's going to make everything work out the way I want it to, because that's a Hollywood ending. That's not a biblical ending.
Right.
Sometimes they're the same,
Yeah.
but the idea is that God controls my eternity. And I think that's one thing that honestly just really helps to recognize that this world is not the be all end all.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? The worst thing that could happen to me is they take my life and I spend eternity, a billion years plus plus plus,
Hmm.
with Christ forever.
I feel like for me, that question has to be answered in just, can I stand before God with whatever this
Yeah,
decision is?
right.
Like, can I uprightly say to God, you know, this was the decision I made. I made it in this moment. I was afraid. I didn't know what to do, whatever else it was. But can I, with integrity and authenticity, say to God, I was honestly trying to do this in
Yeah,
such a way that it would honor you,
yeah,
God. And if the scepter isn't extended, if Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego take those first steps into the fire and they feel it on their feet,
right.
it's burning through, then I can live with that. But God, I really want to honor you in every decision that I make. And so
Yeah, that's good. Thanks, Steve.
one of the things that you talk about is the so what, as we get to the so what, is this idea of the 13th of Adar. And what are these circumstances that cause anxiety? They feel bigger than you. And I've been racking my brain a little bit to think of a time or a
Yeah.
place in my life where I don't know if you have something like that, where it just felt like I just don't have any control over this, God. It feels so much bigger than I am. I don't know what to do about it. How do you trust God in those moments where you're overwhelmed?
Hmm.
And I
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to give a trite answer to that because I certainly do not have that figured out. But I think one thing about the 13th of Adar too is it was out there and it was coming.
I mean,
And every day was a little closer. Every
it's
day
like
was a little
Judgment Day
closer.
waiting for us. Yeah.
I'd love to hear what people have to say about that as well. But for me, the answer honestly is moment by moment.
Yeah.
You know, Jesus, I need your help because I need your help in the big things. I need your help in the daily things. But sometimes I just need your help in the moment by moment things.
Yeah.
I'm going to try to take these thoughts captive and try to live at peace. And yeah, how about you?
Well, I haven't had those exact There's some stuff that
Yeah,
you and I keep private because they're part
sure.
of our family
Right.
and our lives that we don't want to share with everybody. But I think about people who have gotten the diagnosis and they're telling them this many months or this. It feels like
Yeah,
the 13th of Adar
yeah,
is
right,
hanging right out there,
right.
and you can pursue all the treatments and hope and all those things, but it
Hmm.
feels like the 13th of Adar is waiting
Hmm.
right
Yeah,
out there. I feel like there's people who have been through marital drama or pain that it's like I don't even know if my marriage is going to hang on, and there's all this anxiety and all this like bigger oppressive sort of feelings that go along with it. And I have
hmm,
no idea if we're going to make it. I don't
hmm,
know if we're going to make it 6 months. I don't know
hmm,
if we're going to make it a year. And
hmm,
I could see how people would stand in that moment and think that the 13th of Adar is waiting right out there.
hmm,
Job loss,
hmm,
something along those lines.
hmm.
I certainly, most people know my story. When I was going through not
Right,
knowing what my future held, it was a 13th of Adar
right,
moment. I
right.
just didn't know what was going to
Yeah.
come from it. And so sort of your point is not lost on me. That Daniel's answer to that was just faithfulness day to day.
Hmm.
And that's really all you've got when the
Hmm.
13th of Adar is waiting out
Yeah,
there,
yeah,
is to be faithful
yeah,
today and
yeah.
to take the
Part of
next
that
step.
for Daniel and Esther and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego is they do pray.
Yeah.
They do say, "Hey, let's get together, let's
Yeah.
fast and pray. You get your people, I'll fast and pray." So, I mean, there is that leaning into, whether it's our daily disciplines or just the community of faith.
Yeah.
They all in all of those circumstances, they ask someone else to join them in
Right.
prayer.
Right.
So that's good.
Well, and the 13th of Adar story is,
Yeah.
they can defend themselves,
Yeah.
but they had to do it together.
Together,
Right?
right?
Yeah, against the people who are going to come out and attack them, which is such a crazy end to the story in some
Right.
ways, is they just, now you can defend yourselves.
Yeah,
instead
and
of
the
just
Jews
get
win the
slaughtered.
military victory that day. They
Right,
slaughter
absolutely.
the others.
Yeah, and hopefully the 13th of Adar. I mean, although they celebrate it now again and again. Hopefully it was a one-day thing.
Yeah.
Just make it to the end of the day. But there's this idea that the consequences are still out there, and we may still have to face them. And God, we still need you to fight with us and for us in those moments. So
Yeah.
This is one of those stories, though.
Yeah.
It's just one of those stories that is an epic story. I mean, when you line them up there with, it's funny, the others that were, the exile stories are sort of the big,
They're really great.
The Daniel in the lion's den, the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the fire, and Esther, and I think of Ruth and some others that we just Old Testament stories that have stood the test of time.
It's almost like God needs to tell us that I'm with you, even when you're on the margins, even when you're not in the majority, even when it doesn't feel like it's going your way. Which, oh, by the way, is the way the church has been defined from the beginning.
Absolutely.
And the gates of hell will not prevail.
Right.
But
they had to feel that way when Nero was, I'm burning Christians in the courtyard. They had to feel that way as they were marginalized and pursued by Saul, not Paul quite yet, and attacking them. And so this idea that we're going to come under fire for our faith, we're going to come under fire for our devotion to God, should not surprise us.
Right.
But there's opportunity in that, and for such a time as this. So I don't know what your such a time as this is. I don't know what we're going to have more such a time as this things, I think, between you and I in our lives, and whether it's with our family or with the church or with other people that God puts into our lives. And the question is, in those moments, are we going to shrink from them, or are we going to jump into it and continue to look at the dice, whatever they came up, and decide we're going to roll with that.
Yeah. I'd love to hear this week from people, what is your such a time as this? I've talked to a few already, but I'd love to hear more. So let us know.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, well, thanks for joining us for our podcast. This is one of those stories. If you haven't already read it, dive into it, read the whole story, and really get all the details that go along with it. They are crazy details. This is one of those, it would be a Hollywood movie.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely would be a great Hollywood movie. So we invite you to join with the story, and we will see you next week as we wrap up the Old Testament.
Let's do it.
Yep, we're going to wrap up the Old Testament and get on to Christmas in September.
Yes.
You're going to love it. So God bless. We'll see you next week.